Hello guys, and you're welcome. In this tutorial, we are going to be looking at variables and data types in Godot. We're looking at a lot of examples, and this is not meant to be a complex tutorial. We're not going to be doing anything super complex. So the first thing I'll do is just open up Godot and create a project so that we can store information about our project. So here, I'll just going to click on new project, and I'm going to call that variables, like so. And I like to save that in a path where I already have my Godot projects. So in my documents, I have a special folder I created called Godot projects, and I'm going to click select this folder. For the project name, if I click on create folder, everything is good to go. Now I'm going to have my folder called variables in my Godot project folder, and I'm going to leave this at compatibility, and I'll leave this version control metadata on Git. Basically, when I git init my folder, it can be uploaded to Git and GitHub, but that's not the essence of this video. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly create a project. So in computer programming, not just in Godot, a variable is a special name, or what are called identifiers, and they're associated with a specific value or data that can be changed when the program is running or when the program is being executed. And basically, variables are used to store and change or manipulate data in a computer program or in our game. They are very important because they provide a way to represent information that can be changed in a manner. Now, all this is a definition. We're also going to look at what we're doing here. So to create variables, there's something you should be aware of, right? So let's just go ahead and create an empty scene and create a script, and we can start typing in these variables so we can look at the rules and the syntax of how to create variables. And from there, we're going to look at examples of other data types. So to create a scene, I'll just create on the 2D node, and I'll just create a 2D scene like so. I'll just call this main. You can leave it at node 2D, it's not a problem. And the scene is unsaved. So if I do a Control S, I'm going to just create a folder, because I always like to create a folder. And I'll put everything in lowercase or snake case, so no caps, and I'll click OK and click save. Now I have that main scene saved in the scenes folder, and here we can see the file system, we can see our scenes. So next, what I'm going to do is make sure I've selected this main scene, and I'm going to click on this attach a new script, and it's going to call that script main. Again, I like to create a folder for the scripts, so I'll click on this folder right here. I'll click on create folder, and I'll call this scripts. And if you want to put the scripts outside, we can click this arrow and create a folder right here, but I'll just put this in the subfolder in the scripts main folder. So I'll click open and click create. So basically we have our scenes folder, and in our scenes folder, we have a scripts folder, and we have our main Godot folder. So now this word here extends means it's inheriting from node 2D. If we look at the inspector and we click at main, all these properties are built in objects, they are components from the node 2D, and our script here called main.2d is actually inheriting node 2D. What that simply means is I can call any object here or any value such as the position in our script right here. So how do we create variables? So before we begin creating variables, it's important to understand the concept of an identifier. An identifier is a string or text data that restricts itself to an alphabetic character. Basically, you can use an identifier to identify your variable using a value of A to Z, and then you can also use 0 to 9. So what do I mean values of A to Z? So this is what I mean. You can use, and I'm going to create a comment right here using the hash symbol. It means this script is going to ignore everything that comes after the hash symbol. So I can use A, I can use B, all down to the letter Z, or I can use A, B, C, F, R, G, all down to Z to create my variables. Also, I can use 0 to 9. So what that means is if I wanted to create a identifier that the Godot engine can recognize, I can create an identifier called hello, because this is all lowercase. I can also create another identifier called hello. I can create another identifier called HELLO. Now these will all be different identifiers because they are case changes. So this lowercase hello is different from this capital all case hello, and is different from this hello. I can also create an identifier like this. I can say car underscore name underscore 9. That's also a valid identifier. What I cannot do with an identifier is to begin an identifier with a number. So basically, if I say 9 and say hello, if I use a special character like asterisk and I say hello, or I use a special character like the dollar symbol, okay, that's going to work because it's custom to Godot. But if I use parentheses and then say hello or any other word, that's not valid. So I'm just going to say invalid. So these are invalid ways to create an identifier. You can create an identifier with an underscore. That's valid. Basically, I can say underscore player underscore health, or I can even say underscore player underscore health. That's a valid way. So I can begin an identifier with an underscore. Now, we're not declaring variables yet. I'm just showing you the rules of creating variables and how you should create them, and then be aware that they are case sensitive and you can combine uppercase and lowercase letters. There's also something called a camel case, and this is an example of what is called a camel case. And basically it means if you are writing the name of the variable, the first letter of that variable is going to have a capital letters. For example, now let's say enemy health, like so. So the first one is going to be lowercase, but the next letter is going to be an uppercase. A snake case simply means everything is going to be lowercase. For example, I can say enemy health, like so. Now that's snake case, and I'll just go ahead and create another comment like so, and I'm going to say snake case. Now, if I run this script right here, I'm not going to go into encounter any problems because I'm telling the engine that these are all comments because I'm specifying this and beginning everything with the hash symbol. Another way to create comments in Godot is to use these triple quotes, and anything between these triple quotes will be a multiple line comment, not just a single line. Like, for example, I can say this is a multi-line comment, like so, and then I can have this as I can have multiple lines of this comment. It's not going to be a problem. So now that we've seen the basic definition of what the syntaxes are, what I want you to be aware are special words called keywords. So keywords are built in, we can call them built-in identifiers that the Godot engine uses. Basically, these keywords are variables that are valid, but they have been reserved for the engine and they've been built into the engine. For instance, each time you start typing a word that is built into the engine, the color code changes specifically. For instance, this keyword called funk is built into the engine. So if I say funk, you can actually see it's red. If I use the keyword if, this is also red. If I use elif, this is also red. If I use the words like break, continue, having a difficulty trying to spell continue, keywords like pass, return, and keywords like I think class, class is part of it, and enum is also part of the built-in keywords. The word extends, which we have all seen, are all part of the keywords. I could just put this into our multi-line comments so we don't run into an error. So I could just say reserved keywords. So in case you're creating your variables and realize, hey, I'm actually getting a lot of these errors happening, you might actually check the color code and try to find out if you're using a built-in or a reserved keyword. There are a lot of these keywords. We have others like is, and, or, not. These are all part of the reserved keywords that have been reserved for the Godot engine. So that's enough talk. Let's see an example of how we can create these variables. So to create a variable in Godot, all you need to do is to start with a keyword. So we can use the var keyword, which is also a reserved keyword. So I can just say var, and then we can give this variable a valid identifier name. So let's just say player underscore name, and we can set this value to be a specific kind of data. Now this, what I'm showing you right now and putting these double quotes, is a string data type, and basically I can just say a link, and this is actually good to go. So we have a global variable that is available throughout this entire class or this entire script that can be accessed in our ready or our process or any custom function which we create. A function, these are examples of functions. We declare them using the func keyword and then the function name with a opening and closing parentheses, a column, and then you have the body of that function. It all sounds complicated, but trust me, it's not. For instance, we can have a function called func your name, and then we can actually pass in this variable that was global into our function so that it's locally stored within this function. Basically, all this means is this statement or body or content that's in this function is only going to be available when we run this method. And we can run a method by passing the name of the method with parentheses. For instance, I can just say your name, and simply we're calling this function. Again, we're always discussing about variables, but this is just, by the way, to show you how variables kind of work. So again, to declare a variable, we use the var keyword, and let's say enemy type, and we can just say equal to a scout, like so. So we have a variable with the identifier called enemy type, and this is of type scout. So this data type is called a string. Let's look at another type of variable, which is called an integer, which is a positive or negative whole number. So let's say var, and I'll just call this our underscore integer. That's the identifier name, equals 23. And this is an integer. And this is a positive or negative whole number. So basically, this could be negative 23 and as well, and that will be valid. So with the integer, you can store a positive or a negative whole number. 23 point something is not an integer, but is actually what is called a float. So let's go ahead and show that example. So let's say var, let's say game time is equal to 12.34. Now this is what is called a float, and you can use a float to represent a number that has a decimal point, which is why it's called a floating point number, because you can separate the whole number part and you have other floating values after it. So that's what a floating point value means when you're using Godot. We've seen an example of a string. Now, there are other data types that exist in Godot. And like I said, I'm not going to make this super complex, but there's also an array. And an array is an example of a built-in data type. Let's see how we can declare an array, because an array will allow you to group more than one value. So to create an array, I'm just going to say var. Let's just say super underscore array. And that's going to be equal to, we need to use a square bracket, and then we can store an array of similar values. So I'm going to store an array of floats. So I'm going to say 12.34, and then use a comma to separate that value. Let's say 23.6, and comma, let's do a 4.56. So here we've created an identifier called super array of type array by specifying this value. We can access content in an array by using an index. But like I said, this is just going to be a simple definition and example so that we can see how variables are created within the Godot engine. So let's go ahead and see how we can print out information. So for instance, if I wanted to print out this enemy type right here, we have this function called the ready function in Godot, which is going to run once this script is ready. Once our main.gd script is ready, it's going to run first. And to do that, we'll use a built-in function called print, and then you pass in the name of the variable. So now it's enemy type. So let's see enemy type and hit the return key. If we run this script by hitting the play button and selecting this current scene, we should see a display that tells us scout. So basically what this means is it's referencing this string data called scout and it's displaying that string data on the screen. Basically, that's the simple way to display your variables once you've created your variables. So that's a very quick example of how you can create variables, and variables that are only accessible within a function would only run within that function. For instance, if I try to print this variable called player name, let's see what happens. So here I'm going to just declare this and I'll say player underscore name, save that, and let's try to play this. In fact, it's even telling us it's not declared and we'll get an error. So why is that happening? Well, it's simply because the engine cannot find this variable called player name because it's a local variable that is built into the scope of this function called your name. So these are all globals. All these are called globals because, well, they're globally available. They're everywhere. You can access them from any part of your function. But a variable that is declared within a function is a local variable and it has a local scope. So I can just say a local scope right here. And the only way to do that is to just create another variable called player name within this function. So here in the ready function, if I type in this and I change this to, let's say, Mario, and I save this, this is going to actually print out Mario. So we have Mario as the output. So again, another thing that's tricky and confusing when you're using Godot for the first time is that you'd actually hear words like dynamic, like static, typing, and what does, and you also hear words like implicit and explicit. So what do these mean? I'm just quickly going to go through them. So when the way Godot works is that it's a dynamic engine. It's a dynamic scripting environment like JavaScript and like Python. It simply means when you create a variable can change its type when the program is running. For instance, let's use our variable now. We have a variable called player name that is a string data type. Our variable can actually change. So let's say var player underscore name is going to be equal to 23.45 right now. So again, it's going to tell you there's already a variable name declared in this scope. And the reason why that is happening is because you can't have two variables with the scope, but rather what you can do is this. If we get rid of this, like so, we can actually see what's going on right here. We can clear this and we can actually play our scene, and we actually see that our scene runs without an error. So I have a variable called player name that is type string. Now our variable is type float. So what exactly is happening? It's because Godot uses what is called a variant, which is a data type that the system really loves. It means it's a value that the engine uses at the back end to make sure that it recognizes and identifies and can easily change data types from one form to another. Unlike in a situation where your variables are locked, once you create them, you cannot change them anywhere in your script. So that brings us to what is called a static variable. A static variable is a variable that has its type specified. And to do that in Godot, let's just go back and do something up here right now. So right here, let's see an example of how we can change that. Uses what is called type hinting in Godot. So let's just say static variables, or let's just say type hinting. So I'll just say type hinting. And basically with type hinting, you're trying to say, hey, I'm creating a variable and I want to specify its data type so that you strictly know that this variable is an integer and I'm explicitly defining it. Basically, that's what it does. And that's what explicit mean. It means you're specifying the data, and you do that using type hinting. And this is how it's done. So you say var, let's say ammo underscore count, and then you use a column, you specify the data type, and then you pass in a value. So here I just used a type hinting that says this ammo count is actually an integer. It's a positive or negative whole number, and I'm assigning a value using setting it to 24. This equal sign here means an assignment operator, and basically what it means is you're picking whatever is on the right and you're setting it to what is on the left in the memory. So that's what it is. So let's look at another type hinting. So let's say var, let's say game underscore level underscore name is going to be a type string, which is a positive, or which is a text value, and I'll just call this the marrow. And basically what we just did is to enforce that this game level name is a string data type. You can't set it to an integer later on. We're specifying that this is a string value. Basically, when you're using Godot, you can choose what style you want to use. And then this brings us to another style called the inferred typing. And basically the engine will determine what kind of variable is being created without you explicitly stating it. So let's look at the example. So let's say var, and I'm out of ideas right now. So let's just say my booklet underscore pages. I'll just do a column equals, and I'll say 23.4. So this is an inferred type because we're telling the engine, hey, you can determine what type of data this is, and you're actually going to kind of like use it. So it's also a style of specifying a variable where the engine will infer the data type that you're using. So here the engine is going to check and understand that this is a float value. We can also try another one. Let's say age column equals, let's say 23. And again, we've inferred this type, which is an integer, and we're setting the age to a value of 23. So hopefully I'll just quickly stop at this junction so that I don't cause much confusion. So just know that you can explicitly set the value of a variable when you're creating the variable by specifying the type, or you can infer the type using column equals, or you could just leave it dynamic and then leave the variable and then specify the data type, and Godot will take care of that for you. And again, remember that functions just help you group your statements together, and to create functions, you use the func keyword. Another thing I'd like you to also remember, not just the func keyword, you have to specify the function keyword, the name of the function, the opening and closing parentheses, a column, and then the body. If you create a function that doesn't do anything, you need to use the pass keyword, or else you're going to get an error. For example, let's just say does nothing function, and I'm going to just say func boring opening and closing parentheses. And if I save this like this, I'm going to get an error. It says expected indented block after function declaration. If I don't know what I want to do with this method yet, I can just use the pass keyword, and this will prevent it from running into errors. We can actually see Godot using this when we actually have our process function running down here. So whenever you're ready to use this, for instance, let's say we can grab these entire examples, or we can just take these two inferred example types, and then we'll just pass them into boring, and then you need to clear the pass keyword, or else you're actually going to get an error. And this should be super fine. Let me just go ahead and fix this. Again, the GD script is similar to Python, so you have to use an indentation, or else you're going to get an error. So that's why it says it expected indented block after function declaration. So anything that is in a function has to be indented 4 units, like so. Or you could just tab and it will indent it like so for you. So having it like this is going to lead to an error, but when you just tab in and tab in again, it means this variable declarations are in the body of this function and you won't run into a problem. And another thing we could always do with functions is that we can perform mathematical operations with numerical variables, but that's beyond the scope. This is just a basic introduction to show you how variables are. So hopefully you've understood what variables are, how to create variables, the rules of creating variables, the types of variables you can create, what kind of keywords you can use. You can't use your, whether you can use some built-in keywords or not use them, and whether you can use some specific characters to create variables. So hopefully this helps. In case you're new, just take it easy. There's a lot of things to learn in Godot and it could get really complicated, but just take it easy and hopefully you'll be good. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next quick one.